So yes, we are going to move a little bit this way. Stop. I know, Zach.
$500 an hour, 5-hour increments.
I want to be in that line of work.
$2,500 is due.
Do you have an extra packet, Ty?
Yeah.
Is it? Do you have this? Kim? Oh, you got it.
Thank you.
Let's see, how is that going to work? Yeah, I think this one actually should be on this side.
Water bottle.
I can't leave a coffee cup in her house, set it down and have it almost be empty, and it just disappears into the dishwasher. And she just prefers that I
You know
put things
what?
in the sink because she's like, you don't know how to do a load of dishwasher. I was like, okay,
Okay,
it's all
so
you.
I'm not like that. I'm not like that. But, when it comes to my own things, I don't know. I can go back and forth, but I am over. That's so funny.
Yes, sorry, that was my soup for a moment, Ken.
Yeah, that's all right. And it seemed nice you
Then I
warmed
got
up.
moved
It's
down to
good.
the other table, yeah.
That's good.
How's your son doing?
Well, we think good. He's just about 2 months out from the accident.
Okay.
And
Hey, oh my gosh, how are you? It's good to see you. Oh my gosh, you're so huge. When are you due? Like days? So excited for you.
they're just... Okay.
Right, okay. Doing this again.
If everybody could have a seat, we're going to start soon.
Hello, hello.
Basically, well, my due date's in 5 weeks, but it could be less. But if, I forgot.
Good morning. I'm just going to do a quick roll call to make sure that we have quorum. It should be. I can get louder, though. Yes. Okay. You called it, Joe. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to do a quick roll call to make sure that we have quorum. So please raise your hand if I call your name. We're going to do this elementary school style, okay? James Allison. I'm going to butcher this name, so I apologize ahead of time. Hayamut Ashnafi. Zachary Bassler. Ken Cooley.
Here.
David Durham. Rich Desmond. Emily Halcomb. Deborah Hicks. Noel Kammerman. Brett Kaniyuki. Okay, got that. Patrick Kennedy. Troy Lynch.
Here.
Daisy's here. Katie Maple. Caleb Merrill. Jocelyn Mosley. Joseph Pacheco. William Paveo. Brian Pedro. Nicole Piva. Phil. Cool. I was going to get it. Monica Rocha Wyatt. Daryl Rogers. Joseph Smith. Janine Spotsnitz. Tara Turrentine. Ka Vang. Angelina Williams. Perfect. We have quorum.
Call the meeting to order. We have quorum. Thank you, Daisy. Good morning. Meeting's now called to order. I'm Joseph Smith, the CoC Board Chair, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're excited to have you here. Look forward to today's discussion. Housekeeping reminders, cell phone courtesy and early departures. To help keep our meeting running smoothly, we encourage everyone to silence their electronic devices during the session. If your schedule requires you to step out early, please let us know during the announcements. Conflict of interest procedures. As a member of the Sacramento Continuum of Care Board, you must avoid actual or potential conflicts of interest that could compromise the integrity and effectiveness of CoC decision-making. If a conflict exists, the member must recuse themselves from voting, refrain from influencing the discussion, and will not be counted toward the quorum for that item. Conflicted members should also step away during discussions when appropriate. All disclosures and recusals will be documented in board meeting minutes. As a reminder for CoC board members, when using the microphones on the table, be sure to place the microphone near your mouth to ensure your voice is heard. And as we've seen lately, remember to turn the microphone off when you're done speaking. Please complete the CoC board meeting survey via the QR code following the meeting. If you have any questions about the items I just shared, please do not hesitate to ask the SSF staff. First matter is agenda modifications. The board members and SSF staff have the option to request agenda modifications to reorder or remove previously noticed items. Please note that no new items or actions can be added. Are there any proposed agenda modifications from board members? Seeing none. Are there any agenda modifications, SSF staff? There are none. Thank you, Ty. Next, we have announcements, introductions, and reports. First up is me. I do not have anything from the board chair to report. Next, we will have the SSF staff report from Dr. Ayanna McGee.
Everyone hear me okay? All right. So my first item briefly to report out on is the CAS evaluation, which we anticipate having a presentation today from Carrie Abbott and Omar Pessons, which we're very excited about. This effort we embarked on in collaboration with the support of the city and the county and the CAS committee itself. This is an independent third-party evaluation that will be looked at the coordinated entry process locally for us, which is CAS, to evaluate essentially, is it operating fairly, effectively, efficiently, and in alignment with community needs. So more to come. There will be a presentation on that. And I'll just note that I know SSF and the CAS committee and our partners are all absorbing and digesting the findings, and we'll be looking forward over the next year to making sense and integrating some of that work, those findings into our work. My next item, briefly, is the CoC builds item. We wanted to make sure you all were aware that we were able to move forward with the CoC builds application. We received one proposal from the Gathering Inn that we were able to support in moving forward for rehabilitation and acquisition rehabilitation of a site for permanent housing. So that has gone through. Any additional information is on the memo that you can refer to. And then lastly, just wanted to make you all aware that there is also another NOFO available currently that will be closing very soon in good HUD fashion. It's a very quick timeline. It is called the YHSI, or Youth Homelessness System Improvement Opportunity. It's focused specifically on system planning, and looks at things like opportunities to evaluate coordinated entry, to support your youth action board, things like that. So we are looking at SSF for opportunities to partner and submit an application over this next week for this opportunity, specifically supporting youth workforce efforts. So very excited about that opportunity as well, and just wanted to make you all aware. I believe those are the three items that I had for my staff report, so I can pass it back to Joe when he is ready.
Thank you, Doctor.
Good morning, everyone, again. For the consent calendar, we will use a hand vote system. We will start on the left side of the room and work our way over to the right side. Are there any questions before we get started? No? Okay. Do I have a motion for the consent to approve the consent calendar? Do I have a second? You, Monica? All right, great. Let's get started. All right. Is there any public comment before we, public comment or questions before we get started with the voting? Nope. Okay. All right, folks, let's get started. All right. Take it off. Yes, perfect. They're all over the place. Sorry. All right. Kara? Yes. Perfect. You're good. Monica? Yes. All those who vote yes, please raise your hand. It's probably easier to do that on this one. Great. Motion passes.
All right. Thank you, Daisy. Move right into our discussion calendar this morning. Item number one. Over the last few weeks, my fellow executive committee members and I have conducted interviews for board vacancies. Our interviews focused on their current professional roles, their alignment with the mission and work of the CoC board, what drives their dedication to ending homelessness, their capacity to commit to our collective goals during this integral time. As a result of these interviews, we would like to nominate the following candidates for the CoC board. Kelly Sullivan. Kelly's with Sacramento Superior Court, Specialty Courts. Michael Baker with Centerpoint Incorporated, which is a sober living organization. Renee John with Sacramento Employment and Training Agency, otherwise known as SETA, representing workforce development. Prior to voting on this item, we'll take public comments. If you wish to speak, please complete a comment card at the back of the room to secure your place in line. Is there any public comment on this item? There is not. Are there any questions?
I move approval.
We have a motion. We have a second. Daisy?
Joe, sorry, this is got a new system going, so we're trying to get used to it. I think the easiest way to do this is going around the room again, and we're gonna raise our hands and do it that way. Make it easier for everybody. That way I don't have to call everybody's name. All right.
May I make a comment?
Sure.
Can you just call out who's aye and do that?
Yes.
Who's no, do that?
And who abstains?
Need to be visual and distinct so anyone watching actually understands what's happening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. With that, all those who vote in favor, please raise your hand. Yes. All those who vote against, please raise your hand. Any abstentions? All right. Motion passes.
Board members present? Board meeting. Thank you, everyone. Moving on. Item 2, CoC Governance Planning Task Force Update. Ken Cooley.
Morning. Yeah, this will be a very quick update. The task force is scheduled to have our first meeting tomorrow afternoon. We have agendas and we have calendar events going through the fall. So we have scheduled meetings coming up this fall. That is really the update on that agenda. The process will start tomorrow afternoon, and Ken and I and some of the other task force members that are here also will be giving updates at our monthly meetings. Ken?
Yeah. We set the ball in motion. They'll review a lot of the stuff we've seen previously at this meeting, the framework of organization, the letters of intent. By tomorrow afternoon, we will know what happened in Senate or Assembly Appropriations on the Ashby bill. And that'll be done by the end of the month because the legislature will adjourn for the fall on August 31st. So that's kind of like an important element of the conversation. So.
All right, thank you. Do we have any comments from the public on this item? Do we have any board comments on this item? Board comments or questions? No? With that, we can proceed to agenda item 3, the 2026 CoC HUD NOFO priority listing. Ayana McGee presenting.
So just a couple updates on this item. With this item, we are seeking approval of the priority listing, which is shared and should be in your materials. And on behalf of the review panel, we wanted to make this available to you all for discussion and for approval. In accordance with the review panel recently made determinations about scoring and ranking for new and renewal projects as reflected on that priority listing. We also went through an appeals panel process through which you will see this updated listing reflects. Funding is conditional on HUD's review and award process, so I do want to note that. And there's a couple high-level notes about the listing itself. We did receive 57 project applications this year for the local competition. 45 of those did pass threshold and were ranked, as you can see on the listing. 22 renewal projects were accepted and ranked in inclusion in Tier 1, as well as 1 new project in Tier 1. And then in Tier 2, we've got 11 renewal projects and 12 new projects. We also have 2 YHDP, which are youth homelessness demonstration projects that are being competitively renewed, and 6 system grants that were ranked at the bottom of Tier 1, again in alignment with our policies for the NOFO rank and review process. And then 1 planning grant is included on the listing, but it does not get ranked per HUD's NOFO guidelines. What I will just briefly acknowledge in looking at this listing is the significance of the change in HUD's policies this year with the NOFO. As many of you will know, having gone through this process, HUD has a 2-tiering system by which they look at scoring and evaluation. So Tier 1 projects will be conditionally selected, provided they meet the required eligibility thresholds. And then Tier 2 projects must compete nationally, and HUD looks at overall CoC competitiveness as well as the projects themselves and takes into account their specific priorities. So again, for example, with Tier 2, HUD is looking to prioritize transitional housing and supportive services. And what that does mean is that there is particular vulnerability for those projects that are not transitional housing or supportive services in the Tier 2 area. And what I'll call out is that under the 2024 NOFO, we had about $37 million that we could expect, which was 90% of our annual renewal demand available and safely in Tier 1. And in this year's NOFO, that was only 60%, which is $5 million total. So this is a very different cycle. Placement in Tier 2 does not mean that projects will automatically lose funding, but it does increase uncertainty, again, because they are competing nationally against other Tier 2 projects. And so I just want to call attention to the consequence and significance of this NOFO and recognize the work and efforts all across the board from the applicants who submitted their application, the folks who supported on the review panel and the appeals panel. I know I am deeply appreciative of all of the effort that this process has taken, and the listing is what we have presented before you now, and so that is what is going up for approval today. That's it for my piece.
Thank you, Ayana. Prior to voting on this item, we'll first take public comment. If you wish to speak, please complete a comment card at the back of the room to secure your place in line. We have 1 person for public comment. Mike Jaskey.
Mike Jaskey, SACTAC. I'd like an explanation for why compared to the preliminary rank list, SHRA project seems to be moved up and combined.
So we did have an appeals process. It should be reflected in this memo as well. but we did receive 8 formal appeals through the appeals process, and 1 appeal was granted. That 1 appeal was SHRA, which was a result of a scoring issue, and so their project was shifted accordingly. So you'll see that reflected in the updated priority listing.
So it appears to me that the consequence of that is initially scored Tier 2 component of what SHRA does was moved up and combined with the original or a Tier 1 project.
That's correct. That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have any other public comment?
I'd like to add public comment. Can I do?
I'll call board members next. Seeing no public comment, comments from board members? Daryl?
I think it's just very important for the public and that might be watching to understand the importance of the 3 added board members and why it's important. I don't think that a lot of providers or people in the public understand what that Tier 2 placement, that competition looks like, and to have those seats added on the board, having that defined to the public and what that makes this CoC board looks like, and making this CoC board more competitive is the reason why those seats are being added. And so I just wanted to highlight that for public and to because I'm always asked, you know, what is the CoC? How does it work? How can I get on it? And there's a limited number of seats on this board, and if people are asking, you know, what is the process of it or how can I get on it, and then they see 3 more seats get added and don't know why the seats were added, right? I think it brings a context to the fact that those seats were added to make Sacramento County more competitive when it comes to those Tier 2 projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. Do we have any other comments from board members? Bill?
Just a couple of quick questions. Can you remind me, in the staff report it said no renewal projects were reallocated. Can you remind me what that means?
What I understand of the reallocation process is if a project chooses not to renew for the upcoming cycle, those dollars can be shifted and reallocated essentially.
So I'm thinking there was at least one that didn't choose to renew. Am I mistaken, or?
I can follow up on that.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Then I want to follow up maybe on Mike's comment. Can you tell us anything about, I see in the staff report there were 8 appeals and only 1 was honored. So it sounds like, and I presume all of those were appealing the scores they were preliminarily receiving, and 7 of them, we stuck with the scores, but 1 was successful. Can you say anything about the nature of what was the issue and how
Yeah.
did the appeals panel view that?
Yeah, it was a scoring error, and in what you'll see in our rank and review policies is that we have a very narrow scope of what can essentially be successfully appealed upon, and it is limited to scoring errors essentially, and so this was a case where we did have a scoring error and had to shift that. There is a requirement that we're looking at our APRs, our projects are looking at their APRs, and those metrics get calculated. And so there's a lot of back-end data work that happens to calculate those scores.
Okay, so it was a correction in the kind of the data side of the scoring.
Absolutely.
As
Yeah.
opposed to the narrative evaluation. Okay, thanks. Okay, I think that was it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Any other comments or questions from board members? Seeing none. Before I call for a motion in a second, I'll be recusing myself from this vote due to conflict of interest. Anyone else care to declare?
As do I. I'll be abstaining.
Joseph Pacheco has declared. Daisy Madrigal has declared.
I'm recusing myself as well, Caleb Merrill and Jasmine Mosley.
Jasmine and Caleb are recusing themselves as well.
Do folks have to state their reason for their recusal, or is it just recusing, saying that you have a conflict?
Just recusing.
Okay, thank you.
They could have a director perceived conflict.
Yeah, I can answer for me. I'm the executive director of an agency that applied and has been ranked, and I feel that's a conflict, and I should not vote on this.
Well, we have a bit of a problem. Typhonic? One moment, everyone.
Mr. Chair? Through the chair? So real quick, so we need a majority of the quorum, not a majority of the board to support, a majority of the quorum to support? Is that what we're trying to figure out right now? Okay. And how many are recusing themselves? Was it 4, 3, 6? Oh, 6. Okay.
While we're waiting, I thought of one more question. Can you remind me, I know we place SAC Steps Forward requests at the bottom of Tier 1, which makes sense to me, but I also see a score, but the score really is, it's not really a score, it's one digit below the last Tier 1 scoring app, right?
That's correct. It just gives it a score so that it's reflected at the bottom of Tier 1. And then when we move it forward and put it all in eSnaps and submit it to HUD, everything checks out.
Thank you.
And I did get an answer, I think, to your other question about whether there was a reallocation. You might be thinking of Next Move, which was reassigned to a different operator, but it was not reallocated. So if that rings a bell, that might be the case. Yeah.
I'm probably garbling this and mistaken, but I'm thinking of the Mather Village deal where didn't they kind of withdrew from the competition? Is that what they did?
We did have one withdraw from the competition.
Excuse me, I need to abstain as well.
You can abstain in the vote. Recusal is you're not going to be a part of a vote.
I mean, recusal.
You're going to recuse yourself as well.
I was on the
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to ask about that. Yeah, so I'm being advised that I need to recuse myself because I was on the scoring panel, but I'm not getting the conflict. So can somebody explain that to me? I'm sorry?
That's pretty much all I got. I believe that you would need to abstain those that were a part of the decision-making to set the priority list. If I'm incorrect and someone knows, they can.
I'm not seeing the conflict, but if somebody can explain it to me, I'd be glad to recuse myself. You were? Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not seeing a conflict. I think I'm okay.
If I may, I'm not an attorney, but I will say, serving on a multitude of boards, if a subcommittee of the board is selected to make recommendations on any item, that's not usually basis for having to recuse yourself, because it's stated in the staff report who was on the committee and what, and the recommendations, and they can explain themselves if they want to during this meeting. That would be my thought.
We have a motion and a second. Daisy, could you call the roll?
Sorry. Just to make it easier for everybody to hear. All right, let's do this. Let me just go with the folks that are here, make it easier. All right, Zachary was the first. Ken Cooley, perfect. Rich Desmond. Katie Maple.
Aye.
Perfect. Next one is William Paveo.
Aye.
Nicole Piva. Bill. Tara Turrentine. And then Ka Vang. They were the, oh wait, Monica? Perfect, thank you. And then Zachary? Perfect, thanks. And motion passes.
Deborah Hicks.
I'm sorry, Deborah. Deborah Hicks? Thank you. Motion passes.
The motion passes. Once again, one of those situations that reinforces showing up for your board commitment. So we make sure we don't have to teeter on the edge of, but you all showed up, so good job. Thank you. Next, we're going to move to item 4, the CAS evaluation update with Omar and Kelly.
Good morning. Okay. I think everyone has a copy of the presentation. So I will just go ahead and jump in. I know you have a very busy agenda this morning. We're going to go over really briefly. We'll introduce ourselves. We'll go over some of the evaluation questions that we have worked on with SSF and with the community. And then we'll look at the conclusions and recommendations. And we have, I think, a little time for questions and answers at the end there. So very briefly, I'll introduce our team. So Abbott Consulting, that's me. I'm Carrie Abbott, and I've been working in homelessness and supportive housing work for over 30 years, all over the Bay Area and more recently in Sacramento as well. I am very passionate about systems that work for people who are currently experiencing homelessness, and that can produce results in terms of permanent housing outcomes in particular. And I had a chance to study evaluation at Claremont Graduate University with a real focus on homelessness and housing outcomes. And I'm joined today and in the evaluation overall by Omar Passons, who's just here behind me, and I'll let him give a fuller introduction when he comes up to do his half of the presentation. So moving then to the methodology. So we negotiated a scope of work with Sacramento Steps Forward that really looked at how to get information about the questions that they had in terms of compliance with the requirements under HUD CoC rules, under compliance with regulations put forward by the state of California for their funding sources, but also really importantly, a lot of the compliance and regulations related to the coordinated access system come from your continuum of care guidance and the policies and procedures. And so we looked at those. We looked at data from HMIS to see the direct information on client outcomes in the coordinated access system. What happens to people, who gets into it, who doesn't use it, where people end up, and kind of what the speed and equity and all of those factors look like in HMIS, in the client record system. We looked at contracts and agreements. We looked at the policies and regulatory guidance. We did pretty extensive stakeholder interviews with county organizations, with the city of Sacramento, with many of the nonprofit organizations administering services. And then we had many focus groups and interviews with people who were in shelter, with people who were unsheltered, with people who were using various services within that are included in the CAS, and with people who had successfully navigated through the CAS into permanent supportive housing or other outcomes. So the questions for the evaluation, and this is what we based our overall report on that you would also have received. So the question, is the CAS compliant with funder and regulatory requirements? We talked about that with the state, the federal government, and the local continuum of care policies and procedures. Oh, I'm not advancing the slides. Thank you. I will keep an eye though and make sure we're on the same one. Then, is the CAS effective for people experiencing homelessness? Is the CAS equitable, responsive, and accessible? And then, is the CAS sustainable and aligned with funding realities? We can design an amazing system. If we don't have the means to support it, then it will do no one any good. And then, is the revised system for shelter referrals working as intended? This wouldn't be part of a normal overall look in an evaluation, but because there had been some significant changes since the last evaluation, and we are looking at 24 and 25 calendar years, that's when those changes were implemented. And because a big percentage of the people moving through the CAS are going to shelter, that seemed like a really relevant question for the evaluation to see how that had been impacted. Next slide. Okay, this one, a little hard to read on the screen, but what we tried to do is just capture the main components of coordinated access in Sacramento. Looking first at access, people access the CAS either through 211 or through different sites in the field, and that would primarily be through some of the housing navigation teams and others who are trained access points to do the assessments. And secondly, they do an assessment. They have a crisis assessment, and they have the housing conversation tool. The crisis assessment to get into shelter, and the housing conversation tool to look for potential permanent housing outcomes. Then the prioritization, that's based on, as required by HUD, on vulnerabilities and length of homelessness. And within the prioritization, they can create the individual support plans for people who are vulnerable and the extremely vulnerable households backline. So providing extra support within the CAS for people who are navigating multiple disabilities or challenges or barriers to housing. And then connection. So what can we connect people to as a result of the coordinated access assessment. And within that, we have the by name list dashboard, keeping track of the vulnerable households. The HMIS keeps track of everyone who's done an assessment or received services within the system of care. And the governance, which is, of course, the CAS committee we've been reporting to on a regular basis, and your CoC board. Next slide. So, is the CAS compliant? This is the first evaluation question. Is the CAS compliant with federal, state, and local requirements? So what we found as part of the evaluation is that the CAS is generally in compliance with all of these applicable regulations, and that it governed its operation under the regulations consistently in 2024 and 2025. We did see that the limited reach in some areas and difficulty with the phone-anchored design for unsheltered households without reliable telephone access are challenges. Part of the regulations require that the system be accessible to people wherever they are within the continuum of care. And then additionally, the stakeholder consultation channel for city field staff and county behavioral health staff could be strengthened. And what we meant by this is that there's a lot of direct contact with people who are unsheltered by our behavioral health teams, the HEART team, for example, and by DCR staff doing outreach out in the field. And then within those organizations, there's not as much direct input to how the CAS is developed and designed. And those key partners would probably be good to try to figure out how to bring in as partners in thinking about coordinated access overall. Then, moving to the next question. Is the CAS sustainable and aligned with funding realities? This is a really hard one this year. The funding realities have really changed dramatically and are likely to continue to change over the next couple years as we have a change in state government and a sort of unknown trajectory with federal funding. So far, coordinated entry or coordinated access grants have not been slashed by any of the federal agencies, but it's a little unsure about to what extent that will be supported ongoing and whether the regulations will change significantly. Because all of the prioritization factors have always been based on vulnerability, we don't know whether HUD will be looking at changing those. But for 2024 and 2025, we did not see significant changes in that type of governance. And in the level of funding, we did see changes with the state HAP grants. Those have really varied in terms of what's allowable in their funding sources. And so the CAS has really needed to, SSF has really needed to pivot multiple times in order to support the ongoing services in the CAS. When I worked with SSF staff, I noted that they had created multi-year budgets with those contingencies included, so that if the HAP grant changes again, or if particular state health funding sources are not available, then they have a contingency plan for maintaining those essential services that are required. And then the one note on follow-up, and this would be in the recommendations as well, was that the CAS planning could be more effective if it's conducted earlier in the fiscal year so that the city and county partners could really be more at the table in terms of planning the budget for the CAS implementation. And with that, we're going to go into the next questions, and Omar is going to take the mic, and we will stick around for questions.
Thank you, Carrie. And I think just one point, even before we go to the next slide, is what that means, the notion of aligning the budget processes. A lot of times we hear cities and counties, and I'll explain who I am in just a moment, but cities and counties say, get into the budget process in April, May, June, you see these public hearings. For many of you, you know that process actually starts months earlier, right? And so one of the values is working with those city and county partners in the fall before, when there isn't as much public attention, but that's when you really get a chance to integrate across the line. Okay, quick step back. My name is Omar Passons. I'm happy to be here. Brief bit of introduction. I started my work evaluating neighborhood revitalization programs under the Department of Housing and Urban Development had given money to try to we'll say right some historical challenges. So that was 25 years ago. I evaluated the federal government set aside 1% of the Health and Human Services budget to evaluate the success of its programs. That was probably about 20 years ago. Moving forward over the last decade, maybe 15 years, I first was in the nonprofit world and then worked for both county as a director and city as a deputy city manager. And I mention that because a big part of the things that we talk about are the combination of those dynamics, right? City government and the issues around a full city worth of people all doing different types of things, and the county very focused on those most in need and how to get those things to sort of work well together. I wanted to just sort of level set that point as we go. And as we go to the next slide, please, I want to just maybe take 30 seconds. I brought this water bottle because I was thirsty. But I think it's actually useful as we move into this presentation. If we think about this water bottle, like the providers who are out doing this work, many of whom I spoke to in the field, Carrie and I interviewed. If you think about it as the Sacramento Steps Forward staff, right? You think about it as many of you, the shelter providers in this community, right? The behavioral health providers. And you think about the water inside of this as the people who are in need. Right now, I'm consuming this. But just imagine this, I don't know, 12, 16-ounce bottle, and the water was a gallon jug or a 10-gallon jug, right? And you pour it into this little bottle. What's going to happen? At some point, it's going to fill up to the top, and then it's going to start spilling over, and then your whole floor is going to be wet. There's going to be all sorts of other problems associated. I share that point because as we go to this first slide, we are talking not about does the CAS as a system work for every human being that experiences homelessness in Sacramento County. It can't, right? And so if you look at that call volume, tens of thousands of people are calling that system. What we were asked to evaluate is how well the CAS, the Coordinated Access System, works, how effective it is for helping people. And it's the fundamental first point is, who is it able to help? Who can physically actually be helped by a system that doesn't have enough resources, kind of like this water bottle, right, for everybody in need? We wouldn't blame the water bottle that it can't hold 2 gallons of water. And we ought to be mindful that it's not your providers, your teams who we talk to, it's not their fault that our system is inadequately resourced many times over. With that, I just want to say, as we move in, we provided some call volume information, and these slides sort of make that point in many different ways, but there are several opportunities for improvement, and we do want to make sure to highlight those. You can see on this slide this increasing trend. The punchline of this slide, the like 3 most important things: call volume is going up during the review period. You saw an increase, not surprisingly, in the time it took to answer those calls. And it was outside of the study period, but we also wanted to note that 211 also saw a decrease in the early part of 2026 of the call response time, which is to say they adjusted to the fact that they were getting many, many more calls. As Carrie said before, and as you'll hear several times over, one of the things to be mindful of is that call volume really demonstrates the need, but it also reflects that challenge around people whose phones die, who lose their phones because their belongings have been displaced, all the different reasons that we all know about. So just keep that nugget in mind. It's one of the most important things I think we found. Next slide, please. Okay, so now this series of questions, is CAS effective for people experiencing homelessness? And I think that question really actually has sort of two parts, two distinct answers. For people who get connected to identified shelter or services, that's one part. This system is effective. From referral to acceptance to arrival to support within the CAS shelters. Like we saw from people who were in those shelters to providers and on, that system was working for them. And we'll talk about how quickly, once somebody is identified, they are able to actually get in. However, the system struggles under the weight of these two major constraints, one of which you've already heard. There is a severe limit of supply and a resource limitation in proactively communicating that to people, right? And there's a distinction to draw there, right? One is we don't have enough. The other is we need to tell you we don't have enough when you call, so that you're not wondering what's next and you're not constantly sort of stuck in this loop. What we learned from our interviews and some of the qualitative work we did is that it would be wildly expensive to staff a set of people whose sole job was to follow up to tell people that. So one of the questions I think this system will have to grapple with is how best to make sure people have a meaningful expectation. It's like my wife says to me, like, we need clear expectations. What's going to happen, right? It's true in our personal lives. It's true in our professional lives. That said, there have been some recent improvements to refine and improve how that system operates. I think the dashboard associated with the by name list is an example. The Frontline Learning Collaborative under the leadership of people with lived experience. I think that we saw in our research or our evaluation, a trend towards increasing leadership and incorporation of people with lived experience. I think there's probably room for even more as we move forward. Next slide, please. So this slide it sort of ties in from that last slide. When we were asked to identify, is the CAS effective for people experiencing homelessness? That point that we just talked about, if you are identified for shelter and there's a place for you, that process of getting in that, it's a day, right? That's not everybody, that's the median, right? Some people it takes longer, some people it's a little bit less. But then you compare that with the permanent housing, and I want to tie this back because you heard earlier when you were talking about the sort of changes to the HUD-NOFO, right? You already see here the median number of days to get somebody into a permanent housing placement is substantially longer. That is not going to get easier with less money going to building more permanent housing. Again, your outreach workers, your shelter operators, they are not swinging hammers. They're not building construction. They're dealing with what's in front of them to try to help with the system we've got. So this slide, when you think about it, is intended to convey the difference between how the systems work relative to what's available. Next slide, please. One of the questions we were asked to consider is where do people actually go when they do get referred? And what you'll notice, probably the sort of most important sort of high-level takeaway here, is that the vast majority of people being supported by the system are going to either shelter or service-only options, which is not going to be a surprise to many of the people around this table who do that work, right? But it's important to understand if what we're trying to do is to get people to permanently exit that experience of homelessness, one of the challenges is this is what the system has for them. So it puts numbers to maybe the inclination or the understanding that many of you already have. Next slide, please. I actually, on this slide, want to maybe call attention to the quote, because I think it's a useful thing to be sort of mindful of. One of the things that we heard from permanent providers, from shelter operators, from staff, from many of the folks we interviewed, was some variant of, we really need help making sure the level of support matches the level of somebody's actual need. And in this case, we had one provider share, hey, we all know we're familiar with HIPAA, sort of privacy laws. So you're in a situation where somebody who may have some very serious behavioral health or challenges is having some issues, and those staff can't say to the people around them, hey, let's give this person a break. They have to be very careful about that interaction. And so then you end up not just potentially with a challenge for the person who has the behavioral health challenge, but also the other people around them who might end up with a discipline note on their record because they're struggling to deal with somebody who maybe not intentionally, but is sort of creating that conflict. And so one of the last group sessions that we did with people with lived experience, they said, it's great that we have support getting in when we have it. I mean, they acknowledge that they don't always have it, but it's super important that that support continues in the housing. And I understand I'm talking to a room full of people who know that, but for anybody that might be watching, as you go forward with your transition plans, et cetera, it's important that the other entities involved understand that one of the limitations here is the resourcing to make that service level match the need on site. And so the retention numbers, these are, because we're looking at sort of 6-month, 12-month, and 24-month, we can't do 2025 because 2026, right? It wasn't, the data that we had was a 2-year period, so we don't have 24-month responses or 12-month responses for the year 2025 because it hadn't happened by the time we were the evaluation window. But what we see is we do get it. There's a good amount of retention for people that go in, and where it could be higher, one of the things to consider is better matching that service need. Next slide, please. So then the question of whether CAS is equitable, responsive, equitable, responsive, and accessible. And I think the big level takeaway here is we did not find disparities in general on race or other sort of demographic cuts relative to the accessing the system, getting into the system, getting through the system. The rates for an African American or Latino were similar to the rates for white unhoused residents, et cetera. Like that's basically a big part of that punchline. I think one of the things to be mindful of, and you'll see this in the observations for follow-up, is that sort of responsiveness gap question. I alluded to that earlier. On the one hand, there's what happens when I've first been assessed or when I first call 211, but then there's also the question of what happens down the road, and could that inability to connect with people itself create an equitability challenge or a challenge in equity. So that's just, I think, again, as you're planning, I think Dr. McGee mentioned that the part of your process going forward would be to consider, how to incorporate findings. That's an area, that responsiveness question, where there might be some opportunity. Next slide, please. And then on the issue of reliance on 211, I think this is one that's really pretty important to just for the board and any members watching to really hone in on. We can't analyze this, and we didn't analyze this question in isolation. As we noted earlier, tens of thousands of people utilize 211, and many of them do get connected to services, shelter, and far less frequently, due to supply mostly, permanent housing. The question of whether reliance on 211 is effective must be evaluated with the types of systems that can sometimes exist for jurisdictions that are similarly spread out. What I mean by that is, I have worked in San Diego and San Jose, so I'm familiar very much with a couple of other counties, some colleagues in up and down the coast. Sometimes you have outreach, primarily outreach-driven connection to the system. But one of the challenges there, and frankly, one of the reasons one of the largest systems in the state went away from that version, is because then those outreach workers are spending all their time trying to find people who maybe they connected with one day and can't find them now. And so it showed for them an inefficient use of resources and very expensive resources, right? People that you're paying to go out into the field. Another couple areas that I'm aware of, you all are probably familiar with, is the heavy use of drop-in centers, right? On the one hand, you could say that's really important to give somebody a physical location. It doesn't rely on them having a phone or not having a phone. But what if you're in a wheelchair, you don't have money for a cab, can't get on the bus, you don't have any place to store your belongings in the meantime while you got to try to go get there, right? The point I want to underline here is evaluating this answer is not just about the challenge and response time or those kinds of things. It's also as compared to what. And so if you choose to make tweaks, one of the things to be considerate about is, well, what do those actually look like? What if we did switch to those other models? What are we giving up in result? And in a community that's fairly spread out, that has sort of locuses of where most, or centers maybe, of where more of the sort of concentrated populations are who are experiencing homelessness, and they're not all in one part of the region, the notion of trying to capture that with the, again, limited resources you have is really worth being mindful of as you go forward. Now, just our recommendations. Next slide, please. I realize I've gone a little long, so I'm going to just leave the recommendations up and highlight a couple rather than reading them all because we've all got the slides in front of us. But the number one recommendation we had, and it bears repeating, a client-facing standard for post-intake communication. What's the difference between, fast food place X and fast food place Y, right? I was just scroll on Instagram sometimes. I just finished watching this thing, and it was like, this one fast food place is dominating, catching up to McDonald's on a global scale. And they did it by hiring the Four Seasons customer service operation. They didn't actually change much about what they do other than how they interact with people. And so one of our big recommendations is, what would it look like to provide just that sort of concierge level communication and clarity on the front end with people? So that's one of our recommendations. Building durable, if you look at number 5, annual CAS evaluation infrastructure. That sounds like a bunch of maybe borderline consultants garble. I apologize on behalf of Carrie and I. That's probably, but here's what it means, right? Is if you want access to this information on an ongoing basis, you have to invest in allowing whoever it is, in this case, Sacramento Steps Forward is that entity. You have to invest in that, and not just invest in it, but also help them provide the cover so that they can manage what those needs are. We've all been in a place where our boss, our boss's boss, our boss's boss's boss wants something tomorrow, and we had a whole set of plans for what we were going to analyze already, and now those all have to get shelved. Imagine that in the context of doing a meaningful evaluation, right? Those data analysts, those teams need time to focus, not all the time, but time to focus, and they need to build in that sort of annual infrastructure muscle. Next slide, please. And again, I'm not going to read all of these. There's just 4 more of the ones that we had. I think I sort of laid out when I was talking about 211 being effective, some of the alternatives that exist and making sure that you're thinking about it in relation to other things. I do think it's probably of value to consider ways to increase physical access. As I mentioned, one of the things the data shows is that a lot of the people who experience homelessness call from the same few areas. It's not 100%, but there might be some value there in looking at those places. I understand, this is me pulling back my city hat for a moment. One of the challenges that you do run into in a city environment is that kind of push and pull between, well, where are we going to put this building so that people can come, and what are all of the things associated with putting a building there, and how do you design? Those are not reasons not to do it. Those are just reasons to recognize that you're going to end up in conversations with, whatever city you're talking about, staff around how do we, if we're going to do drop-ins, how do we do it in an appropriate and thoughtful manner in the context of where it is? It could be design options, could be operating hours, a number of things. Just something to be mindful of. And then finally, and I probably can't underline this enough, maybe about 3/4 of the way into the evaluation, we were able to see a piece of communication that goes to the providers about changes in availability or of various units. And it was really interesting. I thought about that, and the thing that struck me, I reflected on a conversation I heard from, we'll say, frontline staff over and over again about how often they change jobs, right? Our system, among the many things we don't pay enough for, are the human beings who are doing this work. And as a result, sometimes they have to leave. That's not the providers, if any of you are providers at the table. It's not your fault. The contract comes with the dollar amount it comes with. But the point of all that movement is that you don't necessarily get information transfer. And so working with the provider community to make sure you implement standards and a structure for information transfer so that if Carrie is taking the information on Tuesday and then she takes a job in Oakland, like Omar comes in after, and there's a way for him to know, oh, SSF has this data thing. I need to make sure I get a copy of this. Working together to make sure that transfer will ultimately benefit the people we're all trying to help, right? So that they know, oh yeah, we do have this information. So that knowledge transfer is very, very important. So with that, I know probably went a little bit long. I think Carrie and I are available for questions, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you.
Hang on. Before we move to questions from the board, do we have any members of the public who have comment for this item? All right, seeing none. Monica?
Sorry, super excited about this. Two things. We're actually launching 2 behavioral health providers, one in the zip code of 95838, which I'm sure we saw a lot of calls coming out of that area, and to serve 95821. So I would love to consult with SSF how we can kind of connect and make sure you know there probably will be a drop-in center and homeless-specific outreach coming out of those programs. Second comment and offer I would like to make, I would love to see the results related to behavioral health services so I could take it back to my team. We can figure out how to collaborate to implement your recommendations, which I agree with every single one of them. And finally, I appreciate SSF's transparency in making these results available.
Thank you, Monica. And Dish also asked for some specific takeaways related to vulnerable households, and many of those, of course, also relate to behavioral health. So I think that's something we can certainly follow up on.
Thank you, Monica. Next is Councilmember Maple.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to say first thank you for this report. I read it in depth as well as the slides, and I think it was really helpful for me from the city hat that I wear as well as this hat to really connect the data and how the system is working to the work that we're doing also in the city separately than the county and others and our service providers. There's some things that really shout out to me. One was actually in finding 3.1D where it talks about geographically concentrated calls and assessments, and one of the biggest zip code 95823 is in part in my district, and then mostly in Supervisor Patrick Kennedy, who's not here, in an area called the Fruit Ridge Finger, which is an unincorporated part of the county. And so the quote here is single highest volume of area assessments and calls. And one of the questions I had, and this may not have been in the scope of your assessment, is do we connect at all? You know, here's the area of highest need, let's say, if we're using that as the metric. How does that relate to availability of resources and the geographic distribution of the resources that we have?
So I'll maybe start on that one. What I think part of providing that data is a way to help the organization and the board actually have the data to make those decisions. I think one thing maybe to just be mindful of is that this is the data we actually this is the data that's available. Not everybody is required to provide a zip code. So just be mindful that there's a lot of people that maybe DCR contacts in the field or any number of CoHeWo or et cetera contact in the field where they may not get that information. So I just maybe temper a little bit that notion. But part of, I think, providing it was to allow this body to do exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, and then I guess as a follow-up, and it's okay if you don't know this offhand, but do we know approximately what percentage of calls we actually have like a zip code related to or some kind of geographic designation? So for example, is it 20%? Like do we not know the vast majority of where people are physically located, or is it higher than that? Ballpark is fine.
I don't have we don't have a number offhand, but that'll be easy enough.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Of course, if anyone would.
Hello. To answer your question, we do have that data. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I could probably pull that up here. But our 211 partners, they send us a monthly report, and it gives a percentage of calls from different zip codes.
Okay, that's really helpful. Yeah, maybe that'd be a great follow-up for the board if other folks are also interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And then the two other things I wanted to mention was this was highlighted throughout the report. But just this need for a feedback loop, both with the customers of the system, the people who we're trying to serve, so that they understand. And as I read this, it completely resonated with what I hear when we get constituent calls and folks who are concerned about their ability to understand what's going on. So I've called 211, or I've called 211 for my neighbor, or someone who's down the street. There's a person in front of this church that's been here for whatever, 2 years, and we've been trying to get her connected. Like, these are the kinds of calls we get, and oftentimes people really do feel like they're in a black box. Like, they're like, I don't know what's next. I don't know where I'm at in line. I don't know if I'm actually able to access anything at all. And the answer may be no, and I think that's something we have to be honest and transparent about. And one of the things that I do want to acknowledge when I had my briefing yesterday was that we also have a system that prioritizes people by their greatest need, right? And that's a good thing. And so it's not always as easy as, oh, well, you were 20th in line and now you're 15. You could be 20th today and you could be 100 tomorrow, depending on how many people who have a need. But I do think it's really incumbent upon us to try to figure out some way of better communicating back to folks about what they can expect, because I just think it's an unreasonable expectation to say, okay, call this number, do an assessment, and maybe you'll hear back from us, maybe, but maybe not. So that's just a general comment I wanted to make, and I appreciated that was part of this report. And then the last one is more of about the percentage going to shelter and services only, kind of like shorter term options versus the longer term permanent housing. I think this really illustrates a bigger policy conversation that we're having at the city, and I'm sure at the county and other places, about what types of investments do we make? Do we invest more of our resource into longer term solutions versus shorter term solutions? And like, what are the pros and cons of this? And so it's really helpful to see this and have this data to be able to help guide that conversation. So I just wanted to say I really appreciate all the work that went into this, and I found it very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that the community invested a lot of planning and resources in developing a housing conversation tool where you get to a lot more nuance in terms of the types of service needs people have, and what they could be matched to that would be beneficial long term. But most people don't get to the housing conversation tool because the system is very oriented around the crisis response, which we understand how it ended up that way, but it's a good point that you just don't get the nuance that way.
And then just one thing I'd like to add, to the extent this CoC board does find itself evaluating, like, okay, cities generally are looking for what to do in the meantime, right? What to do until there's sufficient housing. And so I just want to plant the seed that to the extent that you all are engaged in that conversation, one of the opportunities that the CoC board and the subcommittees have is to influence what that meantime actually looks like. There are a wide array of ways that people can address the now while building for the tomorrow. We don't have resources, frankly, at this point, in any system I'm familiar with that addresses both adequately. but you can influence, is this informed by people who are going to live here? Is this in locations that are accessible in whatever way? I've seen communities where they actually have on-demand kind of like public Uber service, right? To help get people from point A to point B so that you're not reliant solely on transportation corridors for these types of things. There's a wide array. I just wanted to mention that.
The meantime has a big part to play in what you said, in being honest. I experienced homelessness, and the best thing that you can do with a person that is experiencing homelessness is to be honest. Because when I was experiencing homelessness, I was more resourceful while I experienced homelessness than I've ever been, right? But having that informational transference was also very key in
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. This is extremely valuable. I mean, it's so much of what we hear from the public is what does the coordination look like? Is coordination happening? What are the systems changes we need to make? And this is a systems and a coordination discussion here. And it occurs to me as I'm listening to it that if you're just a member of the public, there's a lot of technical information being thrown out about just CAS, just the acronym itself. Members of the public wouldn't necessarily understand. So I actually just texted Emily Halcon and said, we need to have presentations about this at our respective, county board of supervisors meetings, the city council, the public needs to understand this system's work and what we're doing. And I agree that it should be evaluated annually. Maybe that's a boon to your consulting practice, but I do support, I think that's great. And I think the point you made about continuing to educate providers because there's such high turnover, I think that's a huge component that we don't focus enough on. Just like continuing to educate the public and ourselves, we have to continuously do that. We may get to the point where we understand something, but that doesn't mean we should get complacent about making sure that new colleagues coming in or members of the public aren't always getting the opportunity to understand these systems. So a couple things I want to follow up on real quick. I know we're running short on time. The calls, are those unique calls to 211 or some of those duplications?
My memory, and I'll have to go back and double check this, but is that they don't have a way to match data across the system, but they do have a way to determine, well, I believe their total call volume regardless of duplication. Okay. So there may be multiples.
Okay, and that occurs to me. I mean, obviously, if it's unique calls, obviously it's a major problem with such a huge need. If it's duplication calls, it's almost worse because it makes me think of Councilmember Maple's comments. What we do in building this system, maintaining this system, nothing we do should result in people having to call multiple times, right? Some things we can't control, people may move, they may be in a different place, it may be hard to find them, but our inability to place them or keeping in contact with them should never be as a result of a shortcoming in the actual system and the resources we have to make sure we maintain contact with people. So I hope there's not a lot of duplication, because if there is, that suggests to me there's a lot of confusion by people who are trying to access, the system. Another question I had, the timelines by destination slide. I want to make sure I understand that, because if I'm just looking at this for the first time, I'm thinking, oh boy, someone gets assessed, they're able to get into a shelter in one day, and that's not the case. We know there's a very long wait. So can you help me understand what that 1 day time frame means, from when to when?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So there's a point at which there are some infirmities in the data because of decisions that I think collectively the board and the committees have made around if people get reassessed, every time they get reassessed, it results in another assessment date in the file.
So it starts the clock again.
And so there isn't always a perfect way to go from which assessment it was to which referral to which, and on and on. So that the actual official timeliness metric is a reassignment date, the first date that is certain to the date of enrollment. So the take-home message maybe is you shouldn't start the clock when somebody first calls. It's not one day to then. Right. It's like once we figure out that a person is actually, there's a bed for this person, and contact that person, the system does its job really effectively at that point, at least as to getting them connected in it. Right. Does that make sense?
No, that's very helpful. When I looked at this slide, I'm like, well, this would give the public, they'd walk away with the belief that, oh, we have enough shelter capacity, we can get someone in right away on day one, which is absolutely not the case, which is why we need to continue building a lot more capacity along the entire continuum.
That's right. And Supervisor Desmond, the one thing I did want to mention back on your previous point, the other reasons that people may call, you may have multiple calls, dropped calls, for example. Somebody may have to call back, their phone cut off as an example. But there are also, to that point about having a standard, I think Mr. Rogers was making this point about communication, right? Well, on the front end, what the standard is. If you don't know, then you have to call back to find out. That's another. So there are some other things that are maybe, at least as we stand right now, the best way for somebody to get that next level of information.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, and that's a good, I think probably a good segue into my next thing. I just want to briefly explore. You'd mentioned something, you talked about DCR at the county and of course, or at the city, and behavioral health and the county, and the level of, I guess, education about CAS and their involvement in informing how successful and effective it is. I wonder if you could comment a little more on that, and is it, how much are the other cities, the other jurisdictions within the county involved in CAS and using CAS? I don't have a real strong grasp of that. If they are even using, I mean, no, Citrus Heights is not.
So Sacramento, City of Sacramento and the county are two of the primary funders of CAS, and particularly for the 211 services. So their role is a little bit different from the other jurisdictions. And there are a couple of ways in which I think that that we recommended that the planning could be improved. One of those is around what the budget needs are in order to run CAS effectively, and really communicating that, telegraphing that sooner in the fiscal process. So, for example, if DCR has an interest in having more, on the ground access points, or if the county wants to see more coordination with the behavioral health screening, then in order to integrate those things, there needs to be a resources conversation before the budget conversation. Yep. And it needs to have all of those involved parties in it. I think typically the way other jurisdictions get involved is through the continuum of care and through the CASC oversight, because that's kind of the point of the committee, is to really oversee the policy and operations of how people access the system of care. We did not get real involvement in the evaluation process from other jurisdictions, other than from people who were experiencing homelessness in those jurisdictions.
Okay. No, thank you. That's helpful, and it's certainly good fodder for discussion among all the jurisdictions for better coordination, countywide. So, thank you.
Just a quick announcement. This item is going long, and we're going to allow it to continue to go long, and we're going to move item 5 over to the next meeting. So we do have some time to keep the discussion going. Next up is Daisy.
Thank you so much for this report. I think it's a lot of the information that you put on here is not surprising to a lot of the providers that are in the room. I do, however, want to offer a perspective regarding the racial equity across CAS stages. So it's section 4.1E. So the way that the CAS system functions is actually fairly new, right? Prior to, I think, even 2023, we had a whole different system. We had a whole different assessment, as you were able to note that the HCT actually didn't become part of how our community assesses until October of 2024. But prior to that, we had a very biased assessment called the VA SPDAT. And we knew that that assessment would prioritize white males at a higher rate than any other race or ethnicity. And I think that we're still trying to fight our way out of that, right? We're still trying to prove to our community that the new assessments and the new process that we have in place are not going to be biased like the previous assessment tool that we had. However, we also have, and this is where I think the gap is coming in, of folks aren't identifying or it's not recorded in the system. Also, the current administration has made it very, very hard for folks to be able to trust it, right? So even though our community is making strides to try to build that trust back up, that we're going to try to prioritize based on the need, it makes it very hard, and I've come across clients that do not want to disclose their race because either they're afraid of the repercussions, and or they're thinking that that's not gonna, it's gonna hurt their chances of being prioritized in some way, shape, or form. And unfortunately, the system has, proven that to be true in the past. And so I think that because it's, you're doing 2024, 2025, that mistrust was still in the system, or still is in the system. And I just wanted to offer a little bit of that perspective as to why we may not be able to fully evaluate, is because people are still not comfortable with sharing that information out of fear.
Thank you. And I mean, absolutely true. And I don't think anyone thinks that we have like completely achieved racial equity in society, let alone in homelessness response. And, you know, it's one of the reasons that we look at outcomes. I just wanted to note that that's also the reason that we include information from the point in time count as a comparison for some of the equity measures, because there is less you know, the point in time count is anonymous. The thinking is there's less incentive to be cautious. And I do, you know, I think people were even this year avoiding being counted in many communities because of the situation. But in 2024, 2025, we didn't have so much reason to believe that that would be skewed. And so I think, you know, it is hard to really get to real equity measures in this moment and to really fully understand what's going on in racial and ethnic dynamics in the homeless population. But including other sources of information like the PIT count to compare with HMIS is one approach. And then, yeah.
The one thing I wanted to add is in 3.6F in the report, I think your point is really well taken, and I wanted to mention that we were sensitive to that very point. We wanted to be able to say, hey, how did this actually compare to what was happening under the VI SPDAT? Unfortunately, as we sort of laid out there, they're not really apples to apples in a way that made it hard to do that. We wanted to be able to share that point because we saw there's a lot of national data, as you mentioned or alluded to, about the problems with the VI SPDAT. So, you know, we're seeing other jurisdictions looking, as you're probably aware, with youth homelessness. We both do youth homelessness related work elsewhere, and needing another assessment or other ways to capture what's specific to youth is also important. So just a couple things to flag.
Thank you. And then switching subjects quickly, I had a question about the timeliness by destination and the way that that was calculated. Was it looked at from referral to intake or from intake to housing? Like, how was that time established? For example, that you had an average time or a median time of 1 day for the shelters. Was that from like the time that the opening became available and then the person was intaked? Or was it from the time that the person was like intaked into possibly going into housing? So for shelter, it's a little bit different, but for the permanent supportive housing, that question would apply because being intake doesn't necessarily mean that you're housed.
So like match, intake, move in?
Yeah.
Sort of
like how was this calculated? How did we get this median?
Yeah, it comes straight away actually. So the CAS has an official timeliness metric that's maybe a little bit more explained in the report, but it's basically reassignment date. So there's a point after they've been initially assigned, right, where they get sort of reassigned and folks know, okay, this person is now going to be connected to an actual resource.
It's referral to intake then.
Yeah, to enrollment. I don't think it's actually,
Or enrollment, yeah.
Yeah.
Enrollment is essentially intake, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that person's going to be housed that day because they still have to do housing finding. And that's why I was like 8 days. I'm like, I know our system's great, but like 8 days? Good job, providers. But that's why I just wanted to clarify exactly what that meant. So it's essentially from the time that the system refers them until the time that they're enrolled in that program. Correct?
Yeah, well, to the second part, I mean, the reassignment date and then to the
enrollment.
Program enrollment. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And then, oh, yeah, I just wanted to note this because I did see on here that one of your recommendations says to extend the by name list dashboard access beyond SSF internal staff with appropriate role-based permissions. I just want to highlight the fact that I think 2025, our community had greater access to the by name list. And it was an internal shift that happened where the community essentially lost the access that they used to have. For example, my program used to run transition age youth case conferencing for a while. It was run by providers. It was led by providers. And providers had an easier time accessing that by name list and knowing exactly what the lists look like, essentially, how many people are on that list. That way they could really gauge, what the numbers in our community look like in real time. And that was a recent shift that has happened. So I'm glad that you guys highlighted the importance for providers to have a bit more access, right? I'm not saying providers need to have access to all of the information, but I do think that access to the by name list dashboard and in a way having some de-identified data so that we can inform our participants and help guide them on the next steps is very, very important. So thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you, Daisy. Next up, Joe Pacheco.
I actually changed my mind. 3.6B, your conclusion is that CAS-placed clients exit to housing in a less percentage than non-CAS referred clients. Is that globally, like for all outcomes, permanent housing, supportive housing, or is that just shelters?
I believe it's just housing, but we'll need to confirm that.
Okay. And my only comment there is I run both types of shelters. That's not my experience. But I do, and I also have a question about the conclusion that CAS serves a higher acuity of clients by design. Are you making that conclusion because CAS placements are based on that crisis tool and their score? Or some other
I'm
factor?
pretty sure this one was specific to housing where people are prioritized by vulnerability.
Okay.
And so because of that, they're getting a more acute, more highly vulnerable population in housing.
Got it.
And also, presumably because of that, they are not retaining housing to the same extent that people coming through other channels are.
I find it as a shelter provider,
Right.
and I'm glad, thank you for your answer. My experience on the ground serving is that our non-CAS referred clients are a much higher acuity than our CAS clients. Our CAS clients are people who have taken some proactive step to gain help, and our non-CAS clients did not believe they were going to be in a homeless shelter this morning, and are usually because of some public nuisance call that resulted in a referral. And just thank you. And I thought that was important for this group.
It'll be helpful to clarify.
Point of clarification. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Other comments from the board?
Good morning. I appreciate that you mentioned that you both have worked on youth homelessness separately, so in other counties. So that gives me sort of the ability to want to say, I know that unfortunately we were connected and to you all, and we're unable to communicate. I come from the education system, so I'm with the County Office of Education. And wanting to just connect so many things, I'll try to do a good job about it. Daryl, a friend of mine, just a beautiful example of children getting connected to education while we're meeting folks where they're at really stops the flow of us being here in 10 and 20 years with the same numbers, right? So important and often overlooked, including in a needs assessment. So just wanted to point that out, not in a critical way, but in a way of that's why it's so important. And this is my 6th year on the CoC board, and I really want to give a compliment to SSF. The truth is, Peter Bell, I think he stepped out already, we've had lots of conversations. 6 years ago, when a family came in education, there was a 1.5 year to a 2-year wait to have an intake to even get into the HMIS system for a family. So I always pause on that, especially as a board member, and I was the secretary when you all were doing this needs assessment, so I was hoping we would be connected. But it has improved, and it is not good enough. Right. That's about funding, that's about all different kinds of reasons. But in our jurisdiction, we have 53 local education agencies that are public institutions. And so we identify so many families. We had over 15,000 children identified last school year. And that's a broader definition. That's the McKinney-Vento definition that education uses, different outside of education. Some folks know that, some folks that's news. HUD has a much narrower definition. So while not all 15,000 students should be represented of how their parents are walking through this system, there is a very large percentage who does go through annually, and every one of those public agencies has a liaison who is tasked with identifying families and serving those students. We are a huge provider, stakeholder, who are referring families to the coordinated access system all the time. And I am grateful to see, I totally agree, and with many, like many folks, and Daisy, especially her comments on thank you for the outcomes. Very accurate, so I'm relieved to see how accurate it is, and really grateful that we have someone of your caliber to be looking at it to say, we've had lots of improvements, but really what do we need to do moving forward? We do a great job. I will again give SSF a compliment. I think these things go unnoticed in collaborating, right? Education in this county, we are sub-grantees for both state and federal funds. We are CAS assessors at the county office. We are in family case conferencing. We are looking at how those families are flowing through. That is unique. San Diego was the first county, we were the second in the state. And so just to put that out there of something we are doing right, that really is looking at one subgroup, and I can appreciate that's in the weeds for the scope of your needs assessment. We weren't looking at different families with children versus other subgroups, but really important. I just want to elevate of how we're looking at how we're serving our children while their families are in this system, their parents are navigating the system. Are they educated? Are they in education? Do they have access? Are they enrolled? And can we transport them? We can do that best when we're working together as a system.
Really well said, and thank you for your work.
I have a question for you. I was looking at the destinations, or I guess the amount of folks that are served through different categories. And the services only, would you be able to explain to folks what exactly that encompasses? Because as someone that utilizes the services only agency, it's not necessarily just services. There is housing happening within those programs. And so if you just like a high level summary of like what programs are encompassed in those services only?
It's a specific designation that excludes the programs that offer housing in addition. So somebody calls for food, for example, or to find out where they can get clothing. Like there are many services only that when you hit that number 8 and you get through that are not about getting all the way to housing in 211. They're just, here's a set of for lack of a better term, services only. And what we can do is we can share back with SSF the list. I mean, frankly, there's just a list that 211 has that says, like, these are the things that qualify as services only. And so it's pretty easy to provide. I just don't happen to have it handy.
Yeah, that would be great, just because I'm curious as to see, because my team's also CAS assessors, right? And so they don't necessarily go through 211. They are their own entry point, and they are services only. So how we calculate that, and I always said that we need a better way in HMIS to track how those programs are housing, because right now I can tell you that I'm having to do a lot of data filtering outside of the system, because that system doesn't function properly for the type of program that I run, and services only, it kind of is the default program that we're left with. So that's another thing that I just kind of wanted to highlight, that we need in HMIS, right, more specific services available and or programs to really be able to capture the work that our community is doing. Because I can tell you, my program is housing a lot of folks and preventing a lot of folks, but the system doesn't necessarily capture them because of the services that are available and just limitations of HMIS as a whole.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think that's largely because HMIS is still, kind of designed by HUD in terms of like what we call things. And so anything that wasn't bricks and mortar when they first mandated HMIS was referred to as services only. And you could even have supportive services under a HUD grant in housing that wasn't under the HUD grant, and those services would still be called services only. And I think communities have really tried to move away from using that designation if it is
possible,
tied
yeah.
to housing. But HUD is still going to pay for it as a grant in services only, so you still have to produce the data to get your renewal in that function.
And I think that the reason why it's important to have kind of like what those services being provided are is because it helps with funding. Like if you're just looking at services only, you may think, oh, this isn't as important as permanent supportive housing, but you can have some really great services that are also housing and diverting from the system, yet they're kind of being lumped up into this services only when it's beyond that, So just wanted to highlight that for the folks on this board, because I know that Katie did make a comment about being able to prioritize or utilize this data to be able to see where should we be putting our investments in. But again, with that services only, it's kind of tricky because it encompasses so much.
Thank you.
That mean time is tied to housing, right? Well, say if I had housing and I mucked it up, right? Now I have to sit in the meantime, right? Services only looks like utilizing persons who are navigating Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever that case may look like, to say, hey, I understand where you're at. Come go to a meeting. Therefore, if I'm waiting to get into housing, by the time 52, that means that person has been clean for 1 year. Right? Now they're better able to pay their bills. Right? Persons with lived experience, persons with lived experience committee, we are all CAS assessors as well. There's some in the audience, right? And I know that in the meantime, they pass out waters to give service, because that is a part of Narcotics Anonymous. Right? So if this person is sitting in the meantime and has maybe mucked it up or has understood that I'm not getting housing right now, I called 211 and they said there is no housing. What do I do in the meantime? Right? You have a group of individuals that can say, hey, we can still go forward in life so that when you are housed, you learn how to be a better neighbor. You learn boundaries. Right? You learn that you want your kids to go to a school in a better neighborhood. Because the data shows that if the kid is experiencing homelessness, right, if not stopped, they will be calling 211, right? So that meantime, and those supportive services, oh, there's a lot of meat there.
Further comments from the board before I take mine? Go ahead, Bill.
Just a quick question. So very early in your presentation, you mentioned all the various stakeholder communities you consulted, and I'm not sure I heard permanent supportive housing developers / operators. You conferred with that community?
Yes.
And what kind of feedback did you hear from them about the referrals coming out of that CAS system?
So we intentionally just labeled them in the report as sort of generic, permanent providers or generic emergency providers, so that nobody had to worry about like their organization maybe being called out specifically. But what we heard, frankly, one thing is what I mentioned about the service level, the resources to match service level to what somebody needs. We talked to, I recall a very vivid conversation where somebody was sharing that, look, it's like everything above a certain level is somebody whose their acuity level, their needs could be just barely into the zone where they are qualified for this type of intervention, to all the way to something that requires a much more extreme or intensive, let's say, level of daily support.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things we heard is that, the referral system, just like I was talking earlier about how we wouldn't blame the water bottle for not being full enough, the referral system does what it can in terms of getting people there. But what the providers told us is, one, hey, we need, frankly, more resources or a different collection of resources to support people when they're here, according to their need. And we also need another source, like another place. So some people are so intense in their need that there would actually be a different type of permanent support that they could need. And then maybe the third thing that I would mention that we heard that I thought was, oh gosh, I'm blanking on if it comes back to me, I'll say it. But those are the two of the biggest things I recall offhand.
I'm curious if you heard the following, which I hear, but I'd be curious to frankly get the collective take on this, which was as permanent supportive housing developments come online, so initial occupancy of that property, that the referrals are perceived as being almost exclusively highest acuity referrals. And so that initial occupancy is, wow, you now have 100 units of really high acuity folks coming in, and stabilizing that property is a real challenge and can take a couple of years. And so I've heard affordable housing developers / permanent supportive housing developers advocate, at least during initial occupancy, could there be a bit of a mix of acuity levels? But over time, once the property stabilizes, then highest acuity referrals work out just fine, but that initial occupancy is tough. I'm curious if you heard any of that feedback.
So I would say this is a statewide conversation right now, both in the Los Angeles area and in the Bay Area. The Nonprofit Housing Association and others have been making recommendations related to coordinated entry. I think that the coordinated entry providers have been less at the table, and really importantly, the folks who provide the ongoing services have not been as much at the table. And so, like, there's a perception that there's a cap to who should go to permanent supportive housing. And in fact, there are very few housing situations that have a higher level of care. Like, we think about boarding care and skilled nursing as some of the only options beyond permanent supportive housing. And boarding care does not necessarily have more appropriate services for the people being referred to supportive housing. So I think really the gap is often that we don't have the level of behavioral health and clinical medical services to provide to meet the needs that people have when they're referred. And that lease-up situation is real, and being able to have housing developers opt into the level of care that they're prepared to support is clearly outside of our scope, but something that could be considered as maybe there are providers who are really well suited to serve people with really high needs and others who are not. And so should that be the same set of resources? Do we treat them all as the same?
One thing maybe to just add to Carrie's point, I know there are a couple people who represent county folks here. Saying that there is not enough behavioral health support is not the same thing as saying, oh, the county needs to X, Y, Z. Our system writ large, our state government, our federal government, horribly inadequately fund a thing and then ask you to bear the brunt, ask you to bear the brunt. So just know that I don't want to put words in Carrie's mouth, but I don't think that's a statement about our county in Sacramento. It's more a statement about the volume of service and level of funding needed.
No, I just wanted to clarify from the behavioral health standpoint, no, don't take it as an accusation. We are underfunded and under-resourced, and we want more. But, William, what happens is when we work with developers, and the developers insist that the clients come from full-service partnerships, which are for our most acute clients. So that's the difficulty there. If they want folks with only moderate mental health needs, it doesn't come with that on-site support. It doesn't come with the quicker crisis response. So the developers insist on full-service partnership clients, which are our highest acuity. So that's kind of the irony of the situation. They are concerned about the acuity, but they want full-service partnership because of the menu of services those clients will receive.
Just FYI, I've never heard a developer say, I want exclusively the highest acuity folks. I've just never heard that.
Yeah.
Typically what they
That's
want is they want the
full-service
services.
Some have regulatory agreements because they built using No Place Like Home or MHSA dollars, and so they're required to serve people either referred through full-service partnership or who meet that level of acuity. So that could be part of the explanation.
My comment. And my place in this universe spans the gamut of, I've lived outside for 5.5 years, but it was a long time ago, right? It was pre-pandemic. It was another world. I almost call my lived experience now more of a lived understanding, right? Because it's aged over time. I still suffer with the PTSD from it, but I am far separated from the experience itself. All the way up to and every stop in between to where I am today, where I'm overseeing a gamut of services from emergency shelter, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, permanent housing without the PSH designation. I love reports like this, right? I get all into it, but the problem with that is I'm going to pull myself back and go back to the person sitting outside right now who is feeling hopeless, feeling like, why should I call 211? What's the use? I've called 211 before. I really like the idea that you're highlighting in here that we need to be able to communicate to the people living outside the reality. Because even as a provider, the CoC board chair, I can't tell them anything because I don't know, right? And I don't want to give them bad news, but I don't want to leave them hanging either. That is worse, right? At least be honest, at least be forthright, make the data, make the reality something for them in the moment, but give us the tool to say, we are going to support you because this is the reality you're facing. And we can plan that, right? We can be intentional about that space. We can help people, we can keep hope alive. Because when hope dies on the street, the human being relies on only desperate measures to exist, which causes all sorts of havoc for them and everyone else around them. The community, the systems of care, law enforcement, my God, it hits everybody. And it's because of this desperate feeling of survival that they just don't know. And so I'm so grateful to your report. I'm so grateful for the people in this room. But before we walk away from this thing, let's remember, right, the person sitting outside right now. I mean, they don't know. And like I've done some good work in my time. I've been surrounded by people who do excellent, exquisite work. And none of us know what to tell them. And that is a freaking crime. So I'll let you conclude, and then we're going to call our meeting.
We love the engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the time. We appreciated working with Sacramento Steps Forward and, frankly, with many of you around this table and in the community. So thank you.
Thank you. Concluding statement from Ayanna, and we're out of here, guys.
Yeah, if I can just underscore everything that you just said, Joe, I think what we're thinking about as SSF is like, what now? With reports like this is not the end point, so how do we translate this into action? And there's a lot of plans underway that we have around client communication opportunities and provider transparency opportunities, thinking about dashboards, reports that we can be sharing in more real time, as well as everything that was brought up around city and county partnership, thinking about the way that we're making investments into the system, understanding the constraints that we're under. So I think there's a lot more good work to come, and we just appreciate all of the comments and engagement in this process, and certainly appreciate the good work being done by the evaluators. So just wanted to land on that.
With that, thank you everyone for today's attendance. Keep an eye on your inboxes, and meeting's adjourned.